I'm going to talk into here, not because you need it in the room, but I realize that we are broadcasting to many people online. So anyway, I'm Rabbi Angela Buchdahl. I'm so happy to be in this conversation with my really dear friend, Pastor Amy Butler. I met Amy. You know that I want to call you Pastor Amy every time, but I'm going to call you Amy, and you're going to call me Angela in this conversation. But I met Amy about a decade ago when she was named the senior pastor of Riverside Church, which is a role she did brilliantly. And we had lunch. Someone kind of set us up like kind of on a date, and we went for lunch, and immediately it was like I found my spiritual sister, and there were so many similarities to the work that we do and the journeys we had been on, even though we come from different faiths and grew up in very different parts of the country, and remained a dear friend. At one point was about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. I don't remember how long ago we went to Israel. 2019. And Amy said, I need to get to Israel, and I want to go with people I trust, and let's make an interfaith women's group. And so that is what we did, an interfaith clergy group. And I helped recruit 6 rabbis, and Amy recruited 5 pastors. And our criteria was these had to be women who had positions of influence in their faith communities, and they also had to be women that we'd want to go to the spa with. So it was like
that was real.
That was really important.
Real. Yeah, that was real. Yeah.
So it was like we needed people that we were going to both really be able to become a kind of a force together. And I'm really grateful that actually literally just this week, one of the pastors from that group, we were reconnected for another reason. But these are women that I love and feel deeply connected to, and our experience of Israel together was transformational for all of us. And I wanted to share one episode because I think it's kind of at the root of what it means to learn from someone of another faith. We were in Bethlehem at the Church of the Nativity, which is a place I'd only gone to as kind of a tourist spot as a Jew, but to be there with people for whom it is a ritual religious place was a very different experience. And after we walked through the church, we went into the garden, and we just had this big theological conversation. And I remember Amy talked about what it was to have a God that was flesh and blood, something that I've never really thought about, but a flesh and blood God, someone that you could actually picture, and also who could make mistakes. I never even thought about that, but I remember that conversation really stayed with me and made me think very much about how learning about another person's faith both helps you understand your own faith in a different way, as well, of course, as learning much more about hers. That's, I think, the beauty of talking to someone who comes from a place of faith, even when it's different, or maybe especially when it's different. And that was the beauty of reading this book. So when Amy sent me this book, I devoured it in a day. And then I immediately wrote to Amy and I said, we need to have you come do a talk at Central. And, this perspective, and I encourage you to read it, is it's unapologetically Christian language. That is what your language is. And yet the particularism of that language, which is very different than mine, spoke to me on a deep soul level. And I think that that is the beauty of, having this kind of cross conversation. So I'm deeply, deeply grateful. Amy now lives in Hawaii. She figured out the good life, and she founded an amazing organization called Invested Faith, which is a faith-based social entrepreneurs program, and doing great work. If you want to talk about that at some point, Amy, I'm happy to talk about it more, and also helps lead a church in Honolulu. So she's doing incredible work. I'm really excited to be talking to you about this, and I wanted to just start with this book cover, which is right behind you if you haven't seen it. But I wanted to just ask you to just as an opener, tell me about how you picked this title and this cover. Why? What is it?
Well, it's so lovely to be here and to see so many familiar faces and people I love so dearly from Riverside Church, and of course to be here with you. Thank you so much. Well, I have to be careful when I talk about this because my editor is sitting right over there. We went around and around and around about the cover, and so I learned that we choose certain covers based on who the audience is, and we needed to do botanicals. And I was like, I don't want to say what audience that is, but anyway, I was like, okay, here's the thing about botanicals. I'm from Hawaii, so I can't like put a carnation on the front of the book, right? And so we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it was really important to me to have this particular plant on the front of the book. It's called an ohia lehua, and it is the first plant that grows after the devastation of a lava flow. So when land is covered with a molten rock, it kills everything. And then eventually through the cracks come this really gangly, ugly little shrub, and it has the most beautiful red, bright flowers on it. And so if you were to look out over a lava flow that's maybe 100 years old, you would see spots of green and then bursts of red. And to me, this sort of was a metaphor for my experience of human life. There's a lot of things that are really, really terrible. And then there's these moments that are so beautiful. They just take your breath away. And so that's the story of the cover, and it's what I'm hoping to convey in the book. And I'm so, Portia, thank you for letting me use that cover. That's appreciated.
I love it. And the title, too. Tell me about that title.
Yeah. So the title comes from a 20th century Christian theologian named Frederick Buechner, who said, "Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid." And in the middle of the terrible and the beautiful, it's always the fear that gets me stuck. And so a lot of the stories that I write about in the book are about times where either I gave in to fear or I managed to climb over it. But I suspect this is not unique to me.
It is definitely not unique to you. And I think that is part of what is so universal. Your story actually reminds me of one that I've shared with my community at one point. But I remember that I went to Costa Rica and we visited the Arenal region, which is a volcanic region. And there are live eruptions all the time. And these eruptions actually, as you might suspect, kill everything as they come through. So it's devastating. And yet it puts down, it's not lava flow. It's just a kind of a ashy dust. But this thing that comes down onto the ground is so unbelievably fertile that something magical happens there, which is, and I didn't notice it until I was seeing that there were these rows of very strange trees that we were driving by. They didn't look like regular trees. They were all perfectly in a row, and they all were like the exact same height, and they were like weird, like things that stuck up like this, and then there would be a tuft and then branches coming out. And I asked my tour guide, I said, "What is the deal with those trees? They're so strange." And he said, "Well, because those weren't trees to begin with. Those were fence posts demarcating property. But over the years, the ground is so fertile that those fence posts have like grown new roots and sprouted up branches from them." And it's a remarkable thing. It is actually was that trip and that vision inspired me to change the way I pray a prayer that talks about the resurrection of the dead. We'd actually, as Reformed Jews, so uncomfortable with resurrection that we changed the language to say, "You give life to all." But after I saw that, I was like, actually, God can bring things back to life that we thought were dead. And so I want to pray for what's possible, not just what already happens. So let's pray for the impossible. So anyway, I changed the prayer, but that's been part of it. But I maybe would like for us to begin in a slightly unusual way for this talk, but what we like to do at Central is not just listen, but reflect. Could I invite you all to turn to someone who's next to you or behind you and think about maybe something beautiful that has come out of the devastation or out of the terrible or out of the volcanic eruption that happened in a life. And I'm inviting you to go as personal or not personal as you want. Like I gave a story that wasn't really personal, but was still a story. So, you can share at the level that you're comfortable with, please. But it is an opportunity to kind of reflect on this and take a moment to be reminded of maybe something that came out of something that was really hard, that beautiful, hearty red flower that came out of the rock or the crack. So let's just take 2 minutes. Please introduce yourself to the person next to you and share. I'll give you 1 more minute. All right, I love this joyful noise. It's the problem when you let people talk. It's good. It's good. I'm going to bring everybody back, and so obviously I picked a very good question.
Good work. Good work. Good work.
So I'm going to invite everyone back. Okay. Yeah, I don't feel like this is actually giving off much sound. There we go. Okay. All right, I'm going to do the rabbinic thing. I'm going to stand for a moment. Okay, that was awesome. First of all, I encourage you to continue having this conversation. And then when you buy this book and you have your book group read the book, start with that question. So, but this was excellent. I want to have a chance to hear a little bit more from Amy. But by the way, I love the energy in the room and the conversation. So that's part of what the goal of being together is. So please feel free to continue this conversation as you leave. Okay, Amy, it is a very big endeavor to write a book. I know because I'm working on one myself right now, and it's painful. Why did you write it? What was your impetus for putting this into the world, and what is your dream for it?
So I say, well, first of all, I love you. Oh, you are.
Thank you. I love you too.
That trip to Israel was life-changing. It was really, it was so profound. So I like to say that this book is the story of Amy having faith and Amy not having faith and Amy having faith and Amy not having faith and Amy having faith, and over and over and over and over again, encountering the divine in my relationships and conversations with other people. That's the way that I learn. I think that's one of the reasons I lead congregations, because I'm looking for that too, right? And I wrote the book because I suspected that I was not the only one who had these moments of doubt and devastation and moments of beautiful faith. And I write in the book that I'm not like really a sit under a tree and think about God kind of person. I encounter the divine in my interactions with you and with my community of faith. And so there were some really, really, really amazing stories that happened to me, and my amazing editor, Portia, helped me shape them into a book that hopefully conveys the idea that if we build relationships across differences, we can learn to love each other.
That's right. That's right. And you've lived that in your life. Speaking about faith and doubt, I wonder if you maybe could share a snippet that from the book that helps people understand maybe that role of doubt in your own faith.
Thanks. Okay, so the setup for this chapter is I had lost a child who died, and so I had just finished seminary, graduating from seminary, and so I'll just read you this brief section. In the days that followed, I found the grief of that goodbye ruinous. I cut the crust off sandwiches and tossed the ball across the living room floor and played the train video again for just a few moments of peace with my toddler, and then I curled up sobbing, bewildered. The more I lived with the reality of that goodbye, the more the questions emerged about my faith, much to my surprise. Had this ever happened because I wasn't the kind of mother who loved the playground? What if this had happened because God decided God couldn't risk entrusting another kid to my care? Does God even work that way? Perhaps most painfully, I was conflating my lack of enthusiasm for motherly tasks with hating children. I couldn't help but fear that I was being punished for being a bad mom. After all, I grew up learning that opinions on abortion, on ending a pregnancy, are tied to faith. But I wasn't in this pain because I'd wanted to kill a baby. I wanted more than anything for that baby to be alive. I felt increasingly alone. I couldn't talk to my husband about what I was feeling. This was happening to my body. One day, a friend called. I had put Hayden to bed, and I was cleaning up after the evening, and she called and she said, "You know, Amy, when Hayden throws a tantrum, when his body goes limp in the middle of the grocery store and he screams at the top of his lungs and he won't stop because he wants a cookie, but you won't give him one." "Sure," I said. Just earlier that week, he had thrown a tantrum so extreme that he vomited over a display of red peppers in the produce section. And all I could think to do was to abandon my full grocery cart and grab my child and flee in total embarrassment. Do you love Hayden any less, even when he's acting like a little hellion, expressing his discontent the only way he knows how? No, of course not, I sniffled. She said, well, I think God is the same way. God can handle your grief and your pain and your outrage and your fear and your doubt. Just let it all out. When we hang up the telephone tonight, you go ahead and you wail your heart out. Just tell God what a total jerk you think he is. Curse the unfairness of it all. Scream about how you don't deserve this and how you're scared you're not good enough, and how if that's the way God thinks about things, then you think he's an ass. Pound your fist on the floor. Tell God you are done. Throw up in the produce section. Whatever you need to do, God can handle it. I stopped crying, stunned.
So you already get a small picture if you haven't met Pastor Amy before. She is not your typical pastor. And part of what I appreciate so much is the honesty and the courage. And I'll share that one of the most astonishing things I learned about Pastor Amy was when it was another one of those times when President Trump was trying to make decisions about women's bodies and abortion. And Amy wrote about the abortion she had to have for a child that was not going to have a life of health in the world, an incredibly painful decision that you had. And she wrote an article in USA Today as the pastor of Riverside Church at that time. And that was, I was just like, wow. That was a kind of courage that I had not even known that someone could have, and I know that you took a lot of hell for that, and yet you knew that that was the story and the honesty that you need to put in the world in that way and in that moment, and it was really extraordinary. And it's powerful to hear about the pain and you being willing to share what that was in that moment too.
I think grief is such a universal human thing, and we try to make sense of it. And that in particular just didn't make any sense to me. And it really, really rocked my faith. I had just graduated from seminary. I was supposed to be leading a church, and I was like, oops, don't believe in God anymore, and or also hate God.
But I think like any real relationship, it has to have all the feelings. And actually, worse than anger and railing, which sometimes is justified with the people even that we love and even God that we have a relationship with, is actually shutting completely down and not having any relationship. So I think it's actually more important when we have justified anger to rage. And by the way, if you look at the Bible, there was plenty of rage. Just take a look at the Psalms. God, why have you abandoned me? I'm in the valley of the shadow of death. You've totally, like, don't hide from me. What's happening? There was plenty of rage there. There's room for rage in our religious tradition. We just feel like we're not allowed to do that, but we are. And I appreciate that you put it into modern language for us, but that's a wise truth. That was really powerful. So you're also underlying something which is just powerful, which is you're a woman. You are a woman who made this choice and talked about your body as a pastor, and that is a foreign concept for so many decades and centuries. Frankly, they were all men, and this realm was just not discussed from the pulpit in any way. It wasn't a matter of faith in the same way, and men got to make all those decisions. I would love for you to talk a little bit. I mean, I'll share just a bit that you can read very quickly in her story, but Amy grew up in a conservative evangelical family where her family definitely more expected her to marry a pastor than to become a pastor.
They still do.
And then you went on to break these stained glass ceilings, including being the first woman to lead the historic Riverside Church. But you also dealt with, your grandfather saying that you were the biggest disappointment in his life, which is painful just to think about that. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the challenges and maybe joys of being a woman in this kind of leadership, in religious leadership?
Ooh, we can talk about that all night, right? I think the best way to understand this, and you all can understand it too, is when I talk about vocation. Like, what is that thing inside of you that you have to do? That you're called to do in the world, that you were born to become. And I had this moment, I was taking a theology class in college, and I was looking around the room, and there's all these white men, and I was the best student in the class, and I thought, I think maybe I'm going to try this, And I'm Hawaiian. I come from the Hawaiian Islands, where it's a matriarchal culture. So I was just like, well, my dad always, said girls could do anything. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this. And the church was like, no. But the example of writing the article for USA Today is a great one, because one of the most beautiful emails I got after that, I got a lot of really horrible ones. Like I have this image of like these old men in some southern state, like turning on their computers and warming up their dial-up internet and writing me 3 pages about what, Anyway, but someone wrote to me and said, we have never had a woman in a tall steeple church talk about abortion in a personal way. The story gets co-opted by political rhetoric. And that right there is enough reason why there should be women. That, in addition to all the little ones who are running around and saying, this is my rabbi, and she's a woman, My children didn't know that men could be pastors. But that said, even coming to Riverside Church here in New York, one of the most progressive congregations in the country, I thought, oh, this would be great. no more sexism. I mean, can't tell you how many times I got kicked out of the nave by a security guard. You know, miss, the nave is closed. You need to leave. And I mean,
That's
I know
just the
you know that too.
beginning.
Yeah.
Yes. What would you say are some of the joys of being a woman in this position, or in as a leader? Because I think women don't talk enough about the joys of leadership. I think we talk too much about. Well, we do. We have a lot of things that we struggle with, but there are reasons to love it and why we still do it.
You know, after I wrote that article in USA Today, you know how many people came to me and said, I had an abortion, or I lost a child, or, you know, it like opened up avenues of conversation that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. I have been in delivery rooms with babies being born, and my male colleagues wouldn't have been invited in. I have seen little girls run to me on Sunday and say, "Look, I got a stole. It's my Halloween costume. I'm gonna," you know, and
Reverend Amy.
and yeah, it's well, you know, you get to step into these beautiful holy moments with people, and in some ways the softness of our feminine presence adds a depth of meaning to that maybe can't be found with our male colleagues.
Beautiful. So it was not an easy path for you. What do you think gave you the strength or the courage, or what we would call the chutzpah in our community, to overcome what were the many obstacles that got kind of put in your way along the way?
Well, I'm kind of stubborn, and like I just thought, well, I'm going to do this. God is calling me to do that. This is the language we use. God is calling me to do this with my life, so I'm going to do it. And because you are telling me I cannot do it, I will do it better than everybody else. And so that was always my sort of mantra to myself. And that led me into some beautiful, wonderful leadership opportunities that were mostly left by the wayside by men. And I don't know if this is happening in the Jewish world, but in the Christian world, you know, a lot of our institutions that are in decline are being taken over by women because the men are like, peace out, you know? And so I had these wonderful experiences of helping historic congregations find new life and find new expressions of their faith in the world. And that's what kept me going. Because I always say, like, when the church is bad, it's really bad. It's really bad. And when the church is good, it's so good. And I live for those moments of so good. I write in the book about a story about my divorce. I unexpectedly was divorced while I was pastor in Washington, D.C., and we had been through so much controversy in the church, trying to change things and all the things we do. And then my life sort of fell apart, and that congregation just surrounded our family and kept us alive. And that's the power of community, you know, to sort of hold us up in those moments when we can't hold ourselves up. And that's why I stay. It's like a drug. Like, come on, people, you're being terrible. Be good, because when you're good, you're so good.
Well, I think the church, the synagogue, I mean, it is the humans that make it up, right? That's and right. Humans are beautiful and as we know, also can do terrible things. And we try to create the environment for us to be called to do the good. It's in all of us, and yet so is the other, which is challenging.
I want to know how you keep going.
This isn't fair. We weren't supposed to do that, but I am constantly inspired by the people that I get to meet here. And I would say that it is not just in people's great moments, which I also really love, weddings I get to do, or a child coming up and taking their place in the community. I'm moved by being at the bedside of someone before they're dying, and the way a family comes together, and even when there's unresolved issues, and just watching how people are really trying. And when I see people who have the courage to get up the next day and live when they've had so much pain, and when I see people's capacities to forgive, all of that, I feel like I get to be in this incredibly remarkable community that continues to inspire me every day. So I love that. And I think that my job is to find the joy every day. So that's the goal. Tell me a little bit about, you just said when the church is bad, it can be really bad. It's not just the church. The church can represent, I think, an institution that lets us down. You might substitute your synagogue. You might substitute your government. You might substitute, some other institution that you relied upon, that you trusted, that like lets you down in some way, And so, when that happens, how do you continue to have faith? Are you able to separate out church from faith? And I want to ask you a question that actually came from someone who sent me a question in advance, because they knew I was doing this conversation with you. A reader said, how do you work with someone pastorally who identifies with the 12-step program, but not with the organized religion of your faith? It's another way of asking that question of how can you actually have something which is a kind of foundational, relational, spiritual experience, perhaps separated from the institution that might not be working for you?
Well, I don't think this will be foreign to you, but I have struggled my whole entire life conflating God and the church. Well, God and the institution that says it represents God. And the truth of the matter is that the church, the synagogue, is a group of people, just like any other group of people. And in fact, in some cases, churches are very often hospitals. Like, it's where people come when they don't get power or recognition outside in their lives, and they can come in and wreak a lot of havoc. And I have struggled my whole life, and I think I will until the day I die, to separate what is God and what is church. Because to me, this is church, or synagogue, or
I'm
whatever.
happy to be at your church, Amy.
Okay,
Yeah.
whatever. This is how I know God is real. This is how I know. And so when the church lets you down, it's like your faith takes a big hit, And that has happened to me repeatedly in my career, and to many of my colleagues as well. And I'll just go back again to say, this has been Amy believes, Amy doesn't believe, Amy believes, Amy doesn't believe. But I don't think it's the institution that matters. I think it's both recognizing the spark of the divine in you and you recognizing it in me, and then finding some way to decide together that we are called to heal the world. We're called to make this world a better place. And I don't know if this might influence the way you do your work, but to me, leading a community of people who are being transformed so that they can be agents of transformation in the world, that is like everything. It's like it's like my best shot at making a difference in the world. Teaching a group of people to love each other so that people around them will say, oh, we could do that. And then slowly, slowly, slowly change the world.
I buy into that vision. It's beautiful, and I think that is it. That's it. That's the work. Will you share another passage with us, maybe that teaches us something else of your own journey?
There are a lot of stories in this book about unlikely encounters I had with people, and after I left New York, I went back to D.C. and I became the interim pastor at National City Christian Church, which is the cathedral for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And if you recall, 2020 was an interesting time. And so this happened at the very end of 2020. By the end of 2020, the nation's capital felt full of tension all of the time. A new president had been elected, much of the country was unhappy about his victory, some even claiming that the election had been stolen. I never felt unsafe in the city exactly, but I now lay in bed at night listening to helicopters overhead, worried. It felt as if everybody was holding a breath that they might be able to let out once we got through the inauguration of the new president, which was still a few weeks away. Following the killing of George Floyd and the protests in the city that summer, many churches in town, including National City, had hung prominent Black Lives Matter signs on their properties. Ours was hanging on a side fence of the church. At least it hung there until it got pulled off and trashed repeatedly. So whenever that happened, we just sighed, got another sign to replace it, and hoped it didn't get destroyed again. The same thing regularly happened to many churches in the downtown area, and according to security cameras, it looked as though the vandals were always visitors from out of town. White supremacist groups were making their way to D.C. with increasing regularity for public demonstrations, and right before Christmas 2020, some of the protesters began engaging in more violent action. That year, I worked my way through the holiday services, and I was looking forward to a few days off and a visit from a dear friend and colleague, long planned for the week after Christmas. My friend arrived, and we got right to doing what we love to do, sitting on the couch, talking and dreaming about innovations in our work. It was December 28th, and we were sitting on the couch talking about the vandalized Black Lives Matter sign situation in town, and she suddenly sat up and she exclaimed, "You should get banners. You should get Black Lives Matter banners, get really, really big ones, and hang them up in between your pillars at the top of the steps. No one will be able to reach them to tear them down, and you can start the new year making an important statement." It was a brilliant idea, brilliant. Immediately, I texted a talented artist friend who was also a pastor, and I asked a big favor. Could he dream up a design for 3 huge Black Lives Matter banners in 24 hours? We found the name of the company that prints and installs the huge banners for the Smithsonian museums, and I left them a message. And then I called the executive pastor to see if we could find some money, and everything came together. The executive pastor found some money in the budget, plus the gifts of a few friends, and the printing company said they could print the banners, no problem. No problem, the printer said, except there was no way the banners could be up and installed by January 1st. Installation of such large banners so high up was complicated, he explained. Plus, these few weeks of holidays saw leaner staff in the sign shop. I could hear the frustration in his voice, and he could hear the disappointment in mine. "Well, when do you think you can get them up?" I finally asked him. He told me the soonest his team could be there to begin installation of the banners would be 7:30 a.m. on Wednesday, January 6th. The banners wouldn't be up for the first part of the year. I would just have to make January 6th work. So disappointed, but still invigorated, we confirmed the plans. And I was sure the press would be interested in these banners going up. So we sent out a press release, and at 7:30 a.m. on January 6th, we were out front, ready to talk to the press about why we were putting the banners up. In the city that day, a sense of unease mounted, and then it increased to alarm when we learned that the Proud Boys, along with other white supremacist groups, Make America Great Again devotees, and Donald Trump supporters, those who felt the election had been stolen, planned to demonstrate at the Capitol on January 6th. But while January 6th was protest day for these right-wing groups, I didn't give them much thought. January 6th to me was banner day. I showed up at the church shortly after installation began, wearing my clerical collar and talking to the press who came to watch the banners go up. Over the course of the next several hours, first one, then the other, and finally the third were hung high between the pillars of National City Christian Church. But as the media was covering our banner installation, the sidewalks around the church started getting uncommonly busy. Surrounded by 4 hotels on the circle, the little group of cameras, a few church members, and me in my collar suddenly became vastly outnumbered by crowds of people carrying Trump flags and signs that read, "Stop the Steal." The protesters noticed our banners. At one point, some of them even climbed up the church steps and, unable to reach the banners to tear them down, reenacted the murder of George Floyd on the front steps of the church. I'd never felt dissonance colliding on such a level before in my life. I stood at the foot of that huge staircase as the installers made the final adjustments to the banners and the media finished recording and interviewing. Everybody there to watch the banners go up knew what a powerful statement they were making. As we were wrapping up, protesters still steadily moving toward the Capitol, filling the sidewalks, I noticed a man standing to my left. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see he was wearing a red MAGA hat and a T-shirt that read, "Stop the Steal." He inched closer and closer until I was definitely uncomfortable. Finally, I turned and greeted him as I was greeting all the media present. "Good morning," he replied. "I didn't think you would want to talk to me." "Well, we've been busy putting up these banners, and I didn't really think you'd want to talk to me either," I answered. "I'm Henry," he said. "I came here from Oklahoma." "I'm Amy," I answered. "I'm the pastor of this church." Henry and I stood on the step of the church as we surveyed the chaos of the moment swirling around us. Then Henry asked if I had a few moments to talk. I had time, but I realized that I didn't want to talk to Henry or anybody else waving a Trump flag near my church's steps. "Did you put those banners on your church today because you think people like me don't like black people?" he asked. I considered my response. "We put the banners up because hate groups keep tearing our smaller banner down, and as people of faith, we feel it's important that a Black Lives Matter sign stays up here in D.C. "Well, I don't hate black people. I even have a few black friends in Oklahoma." I could feel the chasm between us widening as he spoke. "Why are you here?" I asked him. "Well, I'm just here because the election was stolen from Trump, and Americans have to do something about that. But coming 36 hours all the way to D.C. from Oklahoma seems like a long way to travel just to send a message like that. The election is over," I answered. "What are you planning to do?" "Well, we're planning to protest. It's what Americans do," Henry said. "And we're going to keep protesting until Trump gets the presidency back." I looked at Henry, and I looked up at the huge Black Lives Matter banners now puffing out in the wind. I looked at the streams of white people headed toward the Capitol, distrust and distaste, and that general unease rising inside me. Was it the risk we were taking with the banners? Was it the energy in the crowd? I didn't know. "Well, Henry," I said, "it's been nice meeting you. We probably don't agree on many issues, but I hope you have a good time today." "I've never seen a woman pastor before," he said. "And I still don't understand why you hung those banners. I like black people. One of my cousins even married a black person." "Well, then I hope you'll look up at these banners while you're in town and celebrate the value of black lives," I said, now fully aware and urgently disturbed by my growing revulsion at the crowd. "Gotta admit," Henry said, "they do stand out up there." "You be safe, Henry," I said. "You too, and when I get home, I'm going to tell my wife I met a woman pastor." Henry waved as he turned to walk away, his red hat pushed down securely on his head, his white tube socks and lace-up sneakers peeking out from his too short jeans. As he walked away, he called back to me, "Thank you for talking to me. I didn't think you would." Here's the truth. I didn't want to talk to Henry. He made me uncomfortable when he moved into my personal space, and everything he represented repulsed me and made me angry. I looked at him, and I saw a person who vandalized churches and reenacted murders. It was Henry who had the courage to reach across the huge divide between us. I never saw Henry again after he melded into the crowd, but I think about him often. I hope he didn't get hurt. I wonder if the violent attack on the Capitol that day made him rethink some of his political positions. And I wonder if my answer to his question about why we hung Black Lives Matter banners on our pillars made it any clearer to him. I seriously doubt it. But I've been wrong before.
Beautiful teaching and a challenge for us as we go into another election and deja vu. And I think it's very easy, and we fell into this trap before, of demonizing the other side, not really wanting to talk to that other side, being repulsed, all of those things. I think many of us can relate to it. And I guess, what is your wish for America as we go into another election that's going to be very difficult and hard?
You know, being a faith leader in this moment, especially one of your prominence, is so difficult. And now, especially since October 7th, we talk about how we cross divides, and then we experience in real life what seems like impassable barriers. But I just think we have to keep trying. We have to keep trying. We have to keep trying. There's a story in the book about a man named Todd Underwood. I preached a sermon, and I told a story about him in a sermon at Riverside Church. And he apparently had a Google alert on his name. He owns United Gun Group. That's the online gun trading company that sold George Zimmerman's gun, the gun that killed Trayvon Martin. He reached out to me, and we began conversations, the stories in the book, and he's my friend. That's what we have to do, I think.
I think that's courage. That is actually really courage, to be willing to actually have that conversation with someone who thinks not just differently, but maybe even feels threatening to things that we really care about, and to, first of all, understand where they're coming from, if we can possibly begin with that, and then, wow, the level of being able to actually become a friend and learn. That is, I think that's the only thing that will save our country and humanity. The Jewish community is very much feeling, I think, very isolated. You brought up October 7th, since October 7th, and I think that one of the hardest things is being in a place where you don't just feel like we disagree, but your view actually is threatening my existence, is the way I think many Jews feel, and probably there are people on the other side who feel some who it actually is also threatening to where they are. And so I think, I'm just curious, where is your community, and is there a sense of connection to what's happening in Israel from where you are all the way out in a beautiful rock in the middle of the Pacific Ocean?
No, we wake up after the news cycle, and then we just turn off the news and go to the beach. So I
wanted to move to Hawaii.
It's really great. It's really, really great. So referring back to my conversation and friendship with Todd Underwood, I went to visit his family in Kansas City, and I stayed with them. They had so many Bible verses on their walls. I was just like overwhelmed. Like super conservative evangelical Christians. And I wrote about our visit together, which spurred some really beautiful conversation. And I got it from the progressive part of my community. Why would you go visit someone like that? Why would you, suggest that the way he lives his life is appropriate? Why would you? Because if nobody does, then we're never going to get anywhere, right? And I don't know what it feels like to be Jewish in America today. I don't. But I love a lot of people who are. And so I'm going to sit next to you, and I'm going to listen until I understand a little better. And that's what we're going to do. I can't help but say again how deeply profound that trip to Israel was. And wherever you are is where I want to be.
Thank you, Amy. So often when I think about the most terrible things, as well as the most beautiful things, the most important thing is that you are not alone in it. The beautiful things don't feel as real if you don't have someone next to you to like say, isn't that so beautiful? And to share in that. And the terrible things are so much more terrible when you feel alone. And so I think maybe that is at the heart of the sacred work that we try to create with the communities we've been a part of. But maybe that's also at the heart of what God is just that presence, being next to each other. So I don't know where to end. What would you want to end saying to this group? I mean, there's so many things.
So this book is a collection of essays about unlikely relationships that change the way I view God and the world. And back to your question about the woman who finds her faith in the 12-step program. I think none of the questions and the pain that we live as human beings is unique to us. There's always a way. I mean, we saw it at the beginning of this conversation when all of you started talking to each other. Mm-hmm. That's right. And it doesn't matter how different you are than me. There's some beautiful spark of the divine in you that it is my job to learn to recognize and to hold precious. I actually know, Lindsay, that you are beautiful, but and what would happen if we lived our lives that way? What would happen if we built our communities of faith with that sort of ethic and commitment? We could change the world. I can't give up. I can't give up on it. I just can't.
I'm with you. That is the goal. Are we going to take questions? We were actually maybe not going to take questions, but what I want to make sure is that there's time for people who have books and brought books to be able to sign them. And Amy's been gracious enough to say that, like, if you have a question that maybe you feel like you want to ask more privately, that you can come up when you bring the book. And yeah. And I just want to say that that my own faith, I think faith in my mind is actually just little moments of really knowing amidst long valleys where you really actually don't know. So it's another way of saying faith doubt. But for me, it's just like faith is the ability to keep walking forward when there are only glimpses of moments when you're 100% sure. And a lot of times you're just like, what is all of this and how am I going to make it? And so, but I see in you a woman who has continued to put one foot proudly in front of the other, and in the most beautiful way brought God into the world and into my life in a different way as well. And I'm so grateful to share your wisdom with our larger central community in this room and beyond, and our friends from Riverside, and 2 of your children who are here, who are awesome, and your editor, and what a beautiful crew to have, and your agent, awesome. So Amy, thank you for sharing your light and your beauty with the world and your divinity in this. We see your spark and we share it back. Thank you.